So, in today's episode, I want to talk a little bit about debt and whether you should go in it or run out of debt. Well, I don't know what that means, but I'm trying to say get out of debt, hide from debt, or should you go into debt and borrow all of this money? Now, if you're looking at margin debt, which is basically the if you're shorting or you're going long a stock and you want to borrow money from your broker, then you are basically taking on margin debt. And then eventually you're going to have to pay it back. And you could get a margin call if your stock goes too high or too low, depending on whether you're longing the stock or shorting the stock. Now, I don't want to talk about margin debt. But if you're looking at margin debt, you're looking at corporate debt, you're looking at the debt of the U.S. government, or pretty much any government around the world. It's all going up. And I don't know why I started on margin debt. That's like the most random thing you could talk about. But, seeing people go out with their $1,400 checks, I'm sure the margin debts are going higher. And with all this GameStop thing coming back to life, I think you're surely going to see some more debt because I think people are going to feel like they have more money, go borrow some money, try to make some quick money, and interest rates are rising, but they're still incredibly low. And so I want to kind of distinguish the difference between the good debt and the bad debt that we have. And if you look at back after 2008, you look at what was happening after, right? So a lot of corporations loaded up on debt because interest rates were so low long time after 2008. And you had Janet Yellen over there keeping interest rates super, super low. And, she wanted consumers to go borrow, to go spend, with all this Keynesian, economics. And so that didn't actually really happen. I guess there was more debt, there was more spending. So, it did, but the biggest people, the people who took up most of the debt from the low interest rates, was big corporations. And the big corporation went and did stock buybacks with all that debt. And so if you're looking at debt for stock buybacks, that's not good debt. Now, it might be good for the shareholders in some cases, maybe not in the long run, but in the short run, it's going to be good for shareholders. But for the company itself, it's not good. And I want to kind of put debt as like a two-edged sword. So it could be great for you, but it could also hurt you, right? You don't want to stab yourself. You want to stab whatever you want to stab, as long as it's not yourself. So you want to be careful with it, but it could make you a lot of money very quickly, at least relative to if you're spending your own money. And I want to start on kind of the personal level, where you have people, wondering whether they should use credit cards, debit cards, whether they should take a mortgage or just pay cash. And the answer I would give under most circumstances is, if you're not financially stupid, then use debt. And it's most of the times it's better to use other people's money than it is to use your money. Unless, if you're someone who spends every penny you own and you're spending other people's money and you can't pay it back. And I won't jump to the government right now, although I might eventually later. No, I will eventually later, because that's like the most obvious culprit. But I want to start with the personal level. And so I think if you're, maybe in your 20s and you don't have too much money, and you just want to buy normal stuff. You want to buy groceries, you want to pay rent, you want to pay your bills, just common stuff. You want to pay gas. I think you should use your credit card, because first of all, when you use your credit card, you get all of these, like rebates, and maybe some. I know a lot of these card companies offer like, so when you spend $100, you might get like $1 or two back, and that's a thing you don't get with a debit card. But also, you have a lot more safety. So if your stuff gets stolen, your money gets stolen on your card, you're at pretty much no liability. But the more important thing, and the more common thing, is you get to build up your credit score. So you get to take on a mortgage and all of this when you are, let's say, planning to. If you take on a car loan, you'll be able to, and the banks will lend you money, or they'll lend you money at a lower rate. And so the important thing is you have to pay back your money every month. You have to pay back your credit card debt every month, or else, I mean, some of these card companies are charging 18-20% interest. That's crazy. You don't want to be paying back interest rates at 18-20%, because that's going to be way more expensive than just using debit, using your own money to buy stuff. But if you have some financial responsibility, you have some savings, like maybe some emergency savings, you have a steady job, steady income, consistent income, then yeah, you should go on, take debt, use your credit card instead of your debit card, and make full monthly payments on the credit card. And so for stuff like mortgages, I say 99.9% of the time, take on a mortgage. Don't pay cash. Cash is the worst thing you could do for real estate. And I'm not a real estate person, but I think anybody buying a house should take a mortgage. I mean, here's the thing. Right now, mortgage rates are incredibly low. The 30-year fixed rate mortgage is around 3%. If you look at that, then you're essentially, I mean, look at the rate of inflation. It's like 2%. And so the actual money you have to pay, assuming that your income keeps up with inflation, is really around 1%. And you don't have to use your money. And the thing is, a lot of the times you can't even afford to buy the house with your money. And so for a lot of people, mortgages become necessary. They become, a requirement to buy a house. And so most people have to take on a mortgage to buy a house. And I think most people should take on a mortgage to buy a house, because you're getting a fixed rate at 3%. And so if you think that the inflation rate is going to stay under 3% for 30 years, then, I mean, I don't know where you're really coming from. But, unless if you see just massive deflation, I guess taking a mortgage would be bad. And I guess paying cash would be bad as well. But if you think that the average rate of inflation over the next 30 years is going to be over 3%, then you're essentially making money by borrowing other people's money. And so that, that would be pretty much you're getting free money, and you're getting someone else to pay for your stuff while, in the present, and so you could pay them back in the future. And so, let's say you have $1 million, and let's say you spend $500,000 to use as a down payment for a house, and the bank lends you the rest. Let's say it's another 500,000 that the bank lends you. So you have a 50% down mortgage. Well, now the other $500,000 you could go invest it, maybe in the stock market. Maybe you could buy another house with it and do and do whatever. Maybe you could start a business with it, and you're probably, well, maybe you're going to make money on that. The $500,000 you invest or you use on a business, or you could buy something with it. But if you were to go 100% down payment, then you can't invest that money. You can't grow your assets, your wealth, and you're taking a mortgage. You're essentially growing your money with other people's money, which is the bank's money. And guess what? The bank, if the bank fails, well, the Fed's just going to do QE. The Fed's just going to, bail them out with monetary policy. And I don't know, maybe the government's going to bail them out with, whatever fiscal spending also. And so right now, I think if you're going to get a house, a 100% down payment would be a terrible idea, especially if you think within the next 30 years, the annual average rate of inflation is going to be over 3%. And these are things that you should use debt on if you think that you could pay the money back. Now, it's not necessarily good debt. See, the difference between good debt and bad debt is it all depends on whether you're making money or not on the debt. So, if you're getting a mortgage and let's say you're renting your house out, and so you're getting all this free cash flow, you're getting all this money, running into your pockets. Well, then I think it's good debt. Assuming that you didn't make a, stupid investment, maybe if you bought houses in 2008, then, I mean, you could still call it good debt, but it's just a bad investment. But on the other hand, if you got like a millennial with their credit cards and they go spend it on new clothes, new designer sunglasses or whatever, then that would probably count as bad debt, and I would certainly count it as bad debt. I mean, if you flip it or something, I guess you could count that as good debt. But if you're just going to buy it to consume, and whatever the money you spend is not going to make you a return, let me reword that. So the money you spend using your debt, if the interest on that money is not greater than the profit you make from whatever investment you made using the debt, then you have a debt that is putting you at a disadvantage. It's a burden on you. But if the amount of profit you can make using that debt is greater than the interest you have to pay on that debt, then the debt is making you money. And so you're basically getting rich from somebody else's loan. And so I think you should go in debt if that's the case. And the catch is, if you spend it on groceries, if you take on a bank loan for groceries for some reason, you're not going to be making profit on your groceries. Probably not. I mean, who knows? If grocery prices keep on going up, if you bought toilet paper and you sold it on the black market, who knows? Maybe you could have made a fortune. Yeah, so maybe it would be a good investment, good debt, if you bought toilet paper back in March. But if you just bought some useless, expensive good or service that you're not going to flip or make a return off of, then you're you're making no profit off of it, and you have to pay back debt with interest. And so that debt is going to be bad debt. It's going to be a burden for you, a pure burden for you. And that's what you should want to avoid. But, I mean, here's the thing. If the interest you have to pay is so low, or it's nothing, then you would always want to use debt. Because using debt, as long as you could pay it back, and that's a key thing, as long as you could pay back debt, it's always better to use other people's money than it is to use your money. And if you could use both, then use both. I'm not saying you should spend your money, but if you could invest it, spend it, then do both. But always go for other people's money first, because you're not really liable for other people's money. You just have to pay it back, and you avoid the opportunity cost of using your own money. And also, if you're older and you're not really making an income, you shouldn't take on too much debt either. Because if you can't pay it back, then, I mean, if your house is your collateral for your mortgage, well, then you're kind of screwed because your house is going to be gone soon. So it really depends on your financial situation. But let's get to the elephant in the room, which is governments around the world. And I talk about the U.S. government all the time, but who's indebted? I mean, governments around the world are all indebted. And because governments are better than everybody at one thing, and that's spending money. Governments are amazing at spending money, but they're terrible at making money. Well, they love raising taxes, but the voters don't love it. And so they're not great at making money. And so you have a government that is using debt for unproductive things. I mean, let's look at the U.S. government. They're using this. They're selling treasuries to the Fed mostly, which is pretty much just printing money. But they're also selling treasuries to people overseas, and to institutions and to individuals. So the government's getting all this debt, but what is the government spending the money on? Well, they just passed a $1.9 trillion bill. They're funding state governments, which are pretty much all just going to waste this money. And of course, obviously, they're giving everybody $1,400, and all of this is unproductive. All of this does not generate an increased, let's say, profit from the debt, the amount of money that they had from the debt. And so they don't generate any money from the debt, but they have to pay interest on the debt. Now, they're basically borrowing back money, borrowing new money to pay back old money, to pay back the interest on the debt. And I mean, I'm pretty sure the U.S. interest payment on debt is about 30% of tax revenue. Now, I'm not sure if it's 30%. I could be wrong, but I think I read somewhere that it's 30%. But I could be 100% wrong. I don't know. I think it's pretty high, though. Somewhere around 30%, maybe. And, I mean, if you think about that, then it's just someone who's way over leveraged and spending all of their money on unproductive things. Right? Think of a 20-year-old who's got like 8 credit cards and who's borrowing money from one credit card company to pay to another credit card company just to make the minimum payments. and you know, I mean, it's essentially a Ponzi scheme, but nobody really cares because, I mean, most governments are running this Ponzi scheme, and plus most governments are insolvent. And I mean, the U.S. might be the biggest, I guess, the biggest elephant in the room, but they're all elephants. It's just a matter of who's bigger. And so the point is, they're all unproductive with their debt. They all have bad debt, and it doesn't seem like they're going to pay back their debt anytime soon. And the question is, well, eventually they're going to have to pay, and how are they going to pay? And that question is very hard to answer, and unless if you're an insider or unless if you're a policymaker, you have essentially, I mean, you could make predictions, you could speculate, but it's hard to say. And even if you are a politician, it's still hard to say. I mean, because politicians like those guys don't know what they're doing either, right? They don't have a plan, and if they did, they would probably do it already, right? But I mean, nobody has a plan, and everybody wants to delay it so that the next politician or the next Fed chair or whatever type of official, the next person deals with it, right? Kicking the can down the road. Everybody wants to delay the debt repayment, delay the point where we have to cut all of the spending, and nobody wants to do it. And I mean, I would understand because a 20-year-old who's living a very lavish lifestyle, who's spending all the money they don't have, I mean, they don't want their lifestyles to change. They don't want to be, going from AAA steaks every night to eating, pasta, right? They don't want that. But, I mean, eventually, if their incomes don't increase, and it's not looking like the U.S. GDP is anywhere high enough to sustain its, increasing debt levels. So, you have a 20-year-old that's taken on all of this unproductive bad debt, whose income is not anywhere high enough to fund that debt, and who's just borrowing more and more to pay back the existing debt. And so you're just building up a mountain of bad debt, and how it's going to be paid back is very hard to say. And, the thing is, the 20-year-old, the insolvent 20-year-old would have to declare bankruptcy or actually take the responsibility to pay back the debt. But the U.S. and every other country that is, as or more insolvent have printing presses. And so how we're going to deal with things now that we have kind of the easy way out option, although the easy way out option is not going to be an easy way out either, how we're going to deal with things, it's hard to say. And whoever has the answer whoever's right in their predictions will probably make a lot of money. So at the very least, everybody should get prepared. And of course, on the more personal level, take care of their own debts and make sure they can pay back their debts before they worry about the government. But the government's debts is certainly something that we have to worry about, at least in the longer term.